Welcome back. You are listening to the home of forbidden romances. Prepare yourself, because tonight's story will leave you breathless. The charcoal stick snapped in Julian's hand with a sound like a pistol crack, the black dust exploding over his fingers just seconds before Kaylin pinned him against the cold, turpentine-stained wall, his mouth crashing down on Julian's in a kiss that tasted of iron, suppressed rage, and a terrifying, consuming hunger. It wasn't a kiss of affection. It was a declaration of war, a shattering of the precarious truce that had held the loft apartment together for 3 agonizing months. 3 months prior, Julian Vane had been desperate. A classically trained painter exiled from the high society galleries of the capital due to a scandal involving a forged Goya and a senator's son, Julian had retreated to the grimy, industrial underbelly of Sector 4. His loft was a cavernous, drafty space that smelled perpetually of linseed oil and rain. He needed money to keep the lights on, but more importantly, he needed a muse for his comeback series, The Fallen. He required a physique that screamed celestial beauty marred by earthly violence. Enter Kaylin Rhee. Kaylin had answered the roommate ad with a duffel bag thrown over one shoulder and a silence so heavy it felt like a physical weight. He paid 3 months of rent in crumpled, dirty cash. He claimed to be a night shift dock worker, a drifter. But Julian, who had spent his life studying the nuances of the human form, saw the lies etched into Kaylin's body. Dock workers had calluses on their palms. Kaylin had calluses on his trigger fingers. Dock workers had stooped shoulders. Kaylin moved with the silent, fluid lethality of a panther stalking through tall grass. "I don't care what you're running from," Julian had said that first night, eyeing the jagged, pale scar running from Kaylin's collarbone disappearing under his shirt. "Just don't bring the police to my door, and don't touch my canvases." Kaylin had merely grunted, his dark eyes scanning the exits before heading to his room. The arrangement shifted 2 weeks later. Julian was struggling with asterisk study no. 5-star. The professional models he hired were too soft, too clean. They posed, they didn't exist. Frustrated, Julian had stormed into the kitchen at 2 a.m. for coffee, only to find Kaylin shirtless, drinking water by the sink. The moonlight cut across Kaylin's back, illuminating a topography of violence. Muscles coiled tight and dense under skin that bore the roadmap of 1,000 battles, slash marks, burn patches, the distinct pucker of old bullet wounds. It was grotesque. It was magnificent. "I'll knock 500 off the rent," Julian blurted out, his artistic greed overriding his survival instincts. Kaylin turned slowly, the glass hovering near his lips. "For what? Let me paint you. Nude. Or semi-nude. I don't care. I need that." Julian gestured vaguely at Kaylin's torso. Kaylin's eyes narrowed, dark and unreadable. "You want to draw me. I want to capture you. There's a difference." Kaylin stared at him for a long, uncomfortable minute. The air in the kitchen grew thick, charged with an inexplicable tension. 700 off. And you don't ask about the scars. You paint what you see, not what you think you know. Deal. That was the beginning of the torture. The sessions took place in the afternoons when the northern light was gray and diffuse. Julian was a tyrant in the studio. He demanded stillness, absolute and rigid. Kaylin, surprisingly, was good at it. He could hold a pose for hours, his breathing shallow, his heart rate visibly slow in the pulse point of his neck. But the silence was loud. Julian stood behind his easel, charcoal scratching aggressively against the paper. He found himself obsessing over details that shouldn't have mattered. The way Kaylin's dark hair fell over his eyes. The sharp, aristocratic line of his jaw that contradicted his rough mannerisms. The way the muscles of his abdomen contracted when he swallowed. "Chin up," Julian commanded, his voice raspy. "Look at the window. You're supposed to be a fallen angel realizing he can never return home. Look. Desolate." Kaylin didn't move his head. Instead, he shifted his eyes, locking gazes with Julian. There was no desolation there. There was amusement. A dark, predatory amusement. "I'm not an actor, Vane," Kaylin said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the floorboards. "I don't do desolate. I do surviving." "Then show me that," Julian snapped, stepping out from behind the easel. He walked up to the podium, invading Kaylin's personal space. He reached out, his cold fingers brushing against Kaylin's warm, bare shoulder to adjust the angle. At the touch, Kaylin's muscles rippled, hard as stone. Julian froze. Being this close was a mistake. He could smell Kaylin, soap, rain, and the metallic tang of old adrenaline. It was intoxicating. It was dangerous. "You're tense," Julian murmured, not pulling his hand away. "You're standing in my strike zone," Kaylin replied softly. "Is that a threat?" "It's a warning. You look at me like I'm a piece of meat you're about to butcher." "I look at you like art," Julian corrected, his thumb tracing the line of the scar on Kaylin's deltoid. "Who did this to you?" Kaylin's hand shot up, gripping Julian's wrist. His grip was bruising, iron hard. "You broke the rule. No questions. I'm the artist. I need context to render the texture correctly. Make it up." Kaylin shoved Julian's hand away, breaking the contact. "Are we done?" "No," Julian said, stubbornness flaring. "Sit back down." Weeks bled into a month. The painting, a massive oil on canvas, was nearing completion. It was undeniably Julian's masterpiece. The figure on the canvas was raw power and vulnerability combined, a dark deity brought low. But as the image on the canvas sharpened, the man in the apartment began to fray. Julian noticed things. Kaylin slept with a knife under his pillow. Julian had seen the hilt when he went to wake him once. Kaylin never sat with his back to a door. And sometimes, late at night, Julian would hear Kaylin speaking on a burner phone in a language that sounded like Russian, mixed with something far older and harsher. The atmosphere in the loft shifted from professional to suffocating. They danced around each other in the kitchen, bodies brushing in narrow hallways, eyes lingering a second too long before snapping away. It was a slow-motion collision. Julian, usually cold and composed, found himself unable to focus on anything but the man living in the next room. He found himself sketching Kaylin from memory when he was alone. Kaylin sleeping, Kaylin drinking coffee, Kaylin with his hands around a throat. Then came the night of the storm. Rain lashed against the warehouse windows like gravel. The power had flickered and died an hour ago, leaving the studio illuminated only by a dozen pillar candles Julian kept for emergencies. The flickering light cast long, dancing shadows that made the statues and mannequins look like watching ghosts. "One last session," Julian said. He was frantic, manic. The painting needed something, a spark in the eyes. "I need the eyes, Kaylin. I can't get them right." Kaylin sat on the velvet, drape-covered podium, naked from the waist up, wearing loose sweatpants. He looked tired. Not sleepy, but weary in his soul. "It's midnight, Julian. Let it go. I can't let it go. It's lifeless." Julian threw his brush into the jar of turpentine. He marched over to Kaylin. "You're holding back. You're always holding back. You give me the body, but you keep the person locked away in a safe I can't crack." Kaylin looked up, the candlelight reflecting in his obsidian eyes. "Maybe there's nothing in the safe, Julian. Maybe it's empty." "Liar," Julian hissed. He grabbed Kaylin's chin, forcing his head up. "I see you. I see the violence you're hiding. You're not a dock worker. You're a killer. A soldier. Something." Kaylin didn't blink. "Careful." "Why? Are you going to hurt me?" Julian challenged, his heart hammering against his ribs. The adrenaline was a drug. He wanted a reaction. He wanted to break the mask. "Go ahead. Show me the monster. That's what I need for the canvas." "You think you want the monster," Kaylin said quietly, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. "But you're a soft thing, Julian. A porcelain thing. You'll shatter. Try me." Julian tightened his grip on Kaylin's jaw. It was an act of dominance from a man who had no physical power over the beast before him. It was reckless. It was stupid. And it was the spark. Kaylin moved faster than Julian's eyes could track. One moment Julian was standing over him. The next, the world spun. Julian was slammed back against the brick wall, the breath driven from his lungs. The impact rattled his teeth. Before he could gasp, Kaylin was there, pressing his entire body against Julian's, pinning him. Kaylin's forearm was braced against Julian's throat, not enough to choke, but enough to terrify. "Is this what you wanted?" Kaylin snarled, his face inches from Julian's. The mask was gone. The eyes were wild, dilated, burning with a mix of fury and something hotter. "You want to see what's inside? It's ugly, Julian. It eats things like you." Julian couldn't breathe, but he didn't want to. His blood was singing. He looked up at Kaylin, defiant even now. "Paint it," he wheezed. "Show me." Kaylin stared at him, his chest heaving. He looked at Julian's lips, parted and red. He looked at the pulse fluttering frantically in Julian's neck. The anger in Kaelin's eyes morphed, shifted, darkened into lust so potent it felt like a physical blow. "Damn you," Kaelin breathed. And then he kissed him. It was the kiss from the hook, violent, desperate, consuming. Kaelin devoured him. He kissed Julian like a drowning man inhaling air, like a starving man tearing into bread. There was no gentleness. Teeth clashed. Kaelin's hands tangled in Julian's hair, yanking his head back to deepen the angle, to plunder his mouth. Julian made a noise, a whimper that was lost in Kaelin's mouth, and kissed back with equal fervor. He wrapped his legs around Kaelin's waist, his hands clawing at Kaelin's bare back, tracing the scars he had memorized with his eyes, now learning them with his fingertips. The kiss broke, leaving them both gasping, panting into the small space between their mouths. "You talk too much," Kaelin growled, his forehead resting against Julian's. "You analyze too much. And you." Julian swallowed hard, his hands trembling where they rested on Kaelin's shoulders. "You kiss like you're trying to kill me." "Maybe I am," Kaelin muttered, moving to kiss the sensitive skin below Julian's ear. "Or maybe I'm trying to save you." Julian shivered. "Save me from what?" Kaelin froze. He pulled back, his eyes snapping to the darkened window behind Julian. The lust evaporated instantly, replaced by the cold, calculated look of the soldier. "Get down," Kaelin ordered. Wah! Crash! The skylight above them shattered. Glass rained down like diamonds in the candlelight. Two figures dropped from the shadows, rappelling down on silent lines, clad in tactical black gear. Kaelin didn't hesitate. He shoved Julian behind a heavy oak drafting table, shielding him with his own body as the first suppressor-muffled shot thwipped into the floorboards where they had been standing a second ago. "Stay down," Kaelin roared. Julian watched, paralyzed, as his roommate, his muse, transformed. Kaelin grabbed a palette knife from a nearby table. It was a flimsy tool for mixing paint, but in Kaelin's hands, it was a weapon. The first intruder lunged. Kaelin ducked a swinging baton, his movement a blur of efficiency. He stepped inside the guard, drove the palette knife into the man's tactical vest, finding a gap at the shoulder, and pivoted, using the man's momentum to throw him into a stack of canvases. The second intruder raised a silenced pistol. Kaelin didn't have time to dodge. He grabbed a heavy jar of turpentine and hurled it. The glass smashed against the intruder's helmet, blinding him for a split second with the stinging liquid. That second was all Kaelin needed. He closed the distance, a brutal kick to the knee followed by a strike to the throat that sounded sickeningly wet. It was over in 20 seconds. The two intruders lay groaning on the floor. Kaelin stood over them, chest heaving, blood, not his own, spattered across his bare chest, mingling with the charcoal dust and paint. He looked exactly like the figure in Julian's painting. A fallen angel. A destroyer. He turned to Julian. The wildness was still in his eyes, but the fear was there too. "We have to go," Kaelin said, his voice ragged. "Now? They know I'm here." Julian slowly stood up, his legs shaking. He looked at the shattered glass, the unconscious hitman, and then at Kaelin. He should have been terrified. He should have been running for the door. But Julian Vane was an artist. He was obsessed with the truth. And for the first time in his life, the truth was standing right in front of him, covered in blood and waiting for his judgment. "You're not a dock worker," Julian said, his voice surprisingly steady. "I was an enforcer for the syndicate," Kaelin admitted, wiping blood from his cheek. "I left. I took something they wanted. They've been hunting me." He stepped closer, his hands held out in a gesture of surrender. "I'll leave. You won't see me again. You're safe now." Kaelin turned to grab his shirt from the floor. "Wait." Julian stepped over the debris. He reached out and grabbed Kaelin's arm. The skin was hot. "You ruined my skylight," Julian said. Kaelin blinked, confused. "What?" "And you ruined my session. The painting isn't finished." "Julian, these men are killers. More will come." "Let them come," Julian said, a dark, reckless smile curving his lips. He pulled Kaelin closer, ignoring the blood, ignoring the danger. The adrenaline from the kiss was still coursing through him, now mixed with the high of survival. "You owe me, Kaelin. I hired a model. I didn't hire a bodyguard. But it seems I got both." Kalen stared at him as if he were insane. You're crazy. I'm an artist, Julian corrected. He reached up, wiping a smear of blood from Kalen's lip with his thumb. And you're my muse. You don't get to leave until I say you're done. Kalen let out a breath that was half laugh, half groan. The tension in his shoulders dropped. He looked at the unconscious man, then back at the small, arrogant painter who was looking at him with possessive, fiery eyes. If I stay, Kalen said low, leaning down until their foreheads touched again, I'm not sleeping in the guest room anymore. Julian smirked, pulling Kalen down for another kiss. This one's searing and full of promises. I have a king-sized bed. I think we can make it work. And that is how the viper tamed the wolf. If you enjoyed seeing Julian take control of the beast, destroy that like button. And tell me in the comments, would you run away with a dangerous ex-mercenary, or would you turn him in? I'll be reading your answers. Subscribe for the next chapter. Until then.